Contrology, the Pilates method. The method, the work. However you want to describe it, it is the brainchild of German creator and inventor Joe Pilates. Hello everyone, I'm Darian Gold. Thanks for joining us on All Things Pilates. You know, maybe there is something to this idea of 6 degrees of separation. My guest today, Roberta Kirschenbaum, and I, and Joe Pilates walked the same streets in New York City and actually climbed the same stairs in the now famed building 939 8th Avenue. Without being aware of each other, Roberta and I both took dance classes on the second floor at Clark's Center, not knowing that on the same floor Joe Pilates once had his first and only Contrology gym. It was during a ballet class in 1984 when Roberta first heard about Carola Trier, one of Joe Pilates' disciples. Roberta had injured her back, and the studio manager suggested she go see Carola. At that time, Roberta couldn't afford Pilates classes and was able to heal herself. But the buzz around the Pilates method intrigued her, and eventually she began studying with Carola. Roberta's story gets much more interesting. In 2005, she returned to 939 8th Avenue, not as a dancer, but as a Pilates studio owner. And incredibly, these last 16 years has taught the Contrology system in Joe's original space. I'm very excited to have Roberta here to put a cap on Season 3 and to hear how she's helping to keep Joe's method alive. Hello, Roberta. Welcome to All Things Pilates.
Hi, Darian. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak to your listeners and the world about my Pilates journey.
I love it. Thank you. Okay, so Carola Trier, she was really well known in the dance community. What was it like to work with her as your first of the elders, correct?
Correct.
What was she like?
Well, my first impression of Carola was going up to her apartment, and this tiny 4'10", 70-odd-year-old woman answers the door in her little ballet outfit and ballet shoes and little ballet skirt. And as soon as I looked down at this woman, and I'm only 5'2", I didn't have to look down that far.
Yes.
I was just taken aback and impressed by her right away, her friendly attitude. And I had to come into the studio, and first I had to sit down on a bench for about 15 or 20 minutes and just watch what was going on in the studio before she paid attention to me or, came to me. And while I was sitting on that bench, I knew that Carola was watching me as I was watching what was going on in the studio. And as I was in the studio watching a professional dancer working next to a professional businessman, next to a professional businesswoman or housewife of all different ages, I just knew right then and there that this was what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
How many people were in the studio?
I would say about 3 and one other teacher.
3 reformers?
She had, I believe she had 3 reformers and 2 Cadillacs, an armchair, an electric chair, and a bench mat.
Yes. Where did she take you first?
Well, first, Carola, she had this rolling mirror. And she would roll this mirror into a certain place, and you stood in front of this mirror, and you looked at yourself, and she looked at you, and she went through this whole posture analysis of your body in front of this mirror. That's how it began.
Were you shocked to see what you saw, or were you curious,
Uh, it
freaked out?
it was more of like I was at I was at a theater event. I was at a dance concert. I was just open and willing, and whatever she did, okay. Yes, and I understood everything. Of course, I didn't really have any injuries per se when I started Pilates. So I basically had good posture to begin with, having been a dancer since I was 4 years old. And so I didn't really go to Pilates for an injury. It was more curiosity that sent me there. So
She knew you were a dancer.
yes, she could tell. Yes.
Yes, of course. Of course. Ballet, yes, all day long. And that lesson changed your life, I'm sure.
Well, that was my intro. And then it was, okay, here's your, let's get moving. And
Did she remind you of other ballet teachers, or was she more like Joe Pilates in terms of that strict, very firm approach?
well, I never had the pleasure of meeting Joe personally, so I can't
From
attest
what we've heard.
to his personality from what we've heard. And Carola was very charming. Understand that her Pilates studio was in her home. So there was a different invitation. You were coming into her home. And she's a very gracious host as well. Every morning when I eventually did start working for her, she would always make tea and get you some fattening dessert from Greenberg's Bakery downstairs.
Oh my God. She did it right.
Usually around, yes. So, yes, so she was my first experience. And being that it was in her home, it was definitely a different experience when later on I had gone to Romana's studio and Naja and Kathy. Each one had their own personality studio.
Speaking of the other elders, how did you actually find out about Romana, Kathy, Naja?
Through Carola. I started working for Carola. My first introduction to Carola was in April of 1984. I had just gotten my tax return, so now I could afford the $17 an hour that she was charging. And Deborah Lesson was working there as well. And Deborah Lesson was leaving that July to open up her Green Street studio. And so there became a position where I could apprentice and be a teacher, which I asked Carola too. Now, at that time, Carola closed every summer. She closed from July 4th until Labor Day. So I was just new to Pilates and only done 2 months of it. And Carola accepted my request to work for her come that following September. So Carola said, well, over the summer, I'd like you to go study with Romana and Kathy, and you need to, see what they have to offer as well, and which I did. Naja, I found out through somebody else. Naja, I did not find out through Carola, Naja Corey. Naja, I found out through a friend of my boyfriend at the time who was going to Naja. And when she found out I started Pilates, she's like, oh, you have to go to Naja. So I included Naja as well. So those 3 women were my major influence in New York.
3 or 4?
Well, Carola, Romana, Kathy, and Naja. Well, say yes. Besides Carola, Carola was number 1, and
Okay.
then it was Romana and Kathy and Naja.
What were the biggest differences or similarities between those 4 women? Anything stand out?
Their personality. Each one is a different, unique personality. The work was basically the same in all of them. So it was a commonality thread that made it easy to work with each of these people, but just the manner in which they revealed the work. I could talk a lot really about Carola, but post Carola, Romana was about move. You move. Kathy was move and think of what your body, very, very particular about balancing your muscles. Naja was even more nitty picky about where your foot was placed, where this was placed, and various other things. And each had a particular dress code.
Oh.
Which was like common. Carola, no jewelry was allowed. She would have these little pouches, and everybody would put all their jewelry in this pouch, which would then be locked up in the dressing room in the back. Kathy, well, you all had to have a towel. She was teaching at NYU at that time. And also with Carola, you were not allowed to have any hairpins, just something soft. Let's see. And with Naja, we had to wear only white leotards with no tights.
Oh, God.
You had to deal with your body, what it looked like in that mirror.
Oh, my.
And no perfume. You cannot wear any perfume with Naja as well.
And then Romana.
Romana, you can wear anything you want. Romana was the biggest commercial kind of studio. Naja's studio was also, she lived and worked in the same place when I met her. Naja was the first one to open up in Bendel's before Kathy Grant took it over from Naja. And then Naja worked out of her apartment on 55th Street. Kathy worked in a very small space, part of NYU, the Tisch School of the Arts. And so Romana was the biggest, the biggest commercial studio. So it was a lot busier, a lot more activity, a lot of teachers around, and a lot of noise. Carola and Kathy and Naja were much more peaceful, quiet, kind of like I call a Pilates boutique studio rather than a mega studio.
In the mid 80s, is Romana already at Drago's gym?
Yes.
Okay.
No, actually, no. Actually, no, she had a studio on 56th Street. For a while, she was somewhere else before she went to Drago. So I was on her studio on 56th Street before she had officially then moved over to Drago's.
Wasn't Drago's on 56th and 6th
I
or
thought
7th?
it was on 57th and 6th Avenue.
Oh, okay. Okay, so she moved up one block.
Yes.
Which of the elders did you resonate with the most?
Oh, all of them. I mean, I was, this was my journey. Each one of them, I learned more about my own body, my own capabilities, my limitations, my things I could flourish in. I mean, each one offered something different, but variations on the same thing. And I think I had a different, unique relationship with all of them.
That's beautiful. I have a question I've been wondering about because I was only privileged to work with Romana, none of the others. Jay Grimes, of course, but Romana was my biggest influence. And so we were always under the impression that we are referred to as second generation. Do you have thoughts about what second generation really means?
Well, yes, second generation generally would be that I would a student with those who studied with Joe in terms of what were called elders, although we can go into that whole discussion. Most of my teachers had studied with Joe for more than 10 years. I mean, they are the true elders. They were around Joe a long time. So in terms of second generation teachers, I also was around these women. Even though I was teaching, I was still studying with Kathy and Naja along the way as well while I was teaching for Carola. So second generation means that we studied with people who studied with Joe. Although let me be clear that I do consider an elder as one who has studied with Joe Pilates for more than 10 years.
Well, would you say that then, would that mean the same for second generation? So I worked with Romana way more than 10 years. But what happens if someone worked with Nausea for a year? Would they be considered second generation?
I suppose so. I mean, you are, if you're teaching, of course, not just a second generation student, but I guess you can use that. I think it's more for, I don't know, lineage purpose, political purposes, accreditation that people want to put at the end of their name. But now in the history of Pilates, being a second generation teacher,
Does it still have the same cachet or the same?
People still use the name. I could say politically, yes and no. What does a second generation teacher mean? I mean, for the likes of myself, like me and the people of my group through Carola, Jillian Hessel, Deborah Lesson, Jennifer Stacy, they have worked with these elders for quite some time. Now, some people can say, they're second generation. It looks good on their resume, and you think that they know more. But there is no rules and regulations as to what does it mean to be a second generation. What does it mean to be a disciple? All these coin words are out there to give credibility to the person who has a studio and wants to be a teacher.
It's loosely defined. Right. It's something that I've always wondered about and whether or not it had any validity in this day and age.
Yes, but for anybody now to call themselves a second generation teacher is not the same of when that was. And I think that whole lineage sort of came about when the PMA started. And so they wanted to make this chronological order to give a history and a purpose so that people would understand how the work was passed down, because originally the work was passed down, word of mouth. I mean, you were there. There weren't training programs. There weren't books on the method. So it was an oral transmission.
Yes. I think I remember her saying that they never had pencil and paper, as she put it. They never had anything. They just learned by watching and
That's
doing.
it. You learn body by body by body. Not only as a teacher are you learning body by body for every client that comes to see you, but it's also your journey too. I mean, I'm still a student.
Yes, me too. Me too.
I'm a teacher and still a student.
Let me ask you, at what point did you decide to transition from your dance career into teaching Pilates?
Well, I'm not sure if it wasn't at first that I decided to go to Pilates. Pilates came to me.
Okay.
Okay. I didn't seek out to do that. I knew that as a dancer that
There's a shelf life.
Yes. And I was always a good dancer, but not a great dancer. So I never got into a company that was able to pay my rent. So I was a professional waitress. And I knew
I bet you were a fun waitress though.
I was. Lots of stories there too. You learn a lot of psychology about people from being a waitress. Sure. And that's also part of being a Pilates teacher as well. I mean, you're dealing with someone's body, but therefore you're dealing with what's going on in their lives as well. So that was also an excellent education for me. But as I was getting older, I knew that I didn't want to be waiting on tables when I was 40. And what was I going to do? I thought about going to physical therapy school, and I had taken some of the prerequisites to get into physical therapy school. But then Pilates came my way. I had 3 funny incidences that forced me to do Pilates. The first one, as you mentioned earlier, in 1984 or so, I was in a ballet class at Clark Center. I injured my back in an 8 o'clock ballet class
Oh
during the
my
first
goodness.
water
That
brawl.
is so early.
And I hobbled over to Louise Roberts' office, who was then the director of Clark Center, who, by the way, was also responsible for taking care of Clara Pilates after Joe Pilates passed away. Just a little background. Clark Center, before it was Clark Center Dance Studio, it was where Joe Pilates had his studio, amongst other apartments in the back where Bruce King lived and
Yes.
one of his teachers, Hannah.
Yes.
And after Joe died, Clara lived for about another 10 years or so, and Louise Roberts helped to take care of her there.
That's beautiful.
So I heard about Pilates then, as I mentioned, but I didn't do Pilates then because I just went home, took a bath in Epsom salt, and then I was back dancing the next day. My dancing partner at that time bought me the first Pilates book, and he had written in the inscription, "Go for it. This is what you're going to do for the rest of your life." And I still had no idea what he was talking about. And by this time, I was a glorified waitress in a hotel and room service. So every night on the phone, it would be, "Good evening, room service. May I help you?" And for quite a few months, I talked to a visiting editor from Vanity Fair magazine from England. And after him talking to me every night, offering his dinner, one night he said to me, "Well, Roberta, what else do you do? Is this all you do is room service?" And I said, "No, I dance during the day." And he said, "Oh, you got to go to Carola Trier." So it was like, okay, 3 times people have mentioned Carola Trier and Pilates to me. And I said, "Okay, I'm surrendering. I'm not in charge. Let me go find out what this is about." And that's how I got to Pilates with Carola, as I mentioned earlier. And as soon as I met Carola and saw what was going on in the studio, my prayers had been answered. This is what I was going to do for the rest of my life.
The Pilates book, that's the one with Philip and Gail?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes, I have that one. Did you ever go through a certification program?
No, there wasn't such a thing as that. I considered myself an apprentice.
Sure.
And a teacher. And as it says, you learn body by body. I learned great things from Carola in terms of how to see the body and how to touch the body.
So important.
And you never did an exercise on a client without Carola's permission. There was an order, but if I was working with a client and I felt like, "Oh, I want to do knee stretches on this client," but I would always ask Carola, "Carola, is this client ready to do knee stretches? And then Carola would always come over and align the client and teach the knee stretches with me there so I could see what she's doing. And so then I could continue putting the knee stretches into the program later." And
fabulous.
It's so repetitive. And then on your own thing, it's so repetitive, which is so wonderful that you eventually get to memorize the exercises. The next key is being able to put it properly on the client in front of you.
Yes. That is difficult to teach.
Absolutely.
And then to practice.
So no, there were no written certification programs. The first one was created, which I took with Romana in about 1990. That was the first. And even though I had already been teaching for 6 years, I took that program too. Now they put it in a book.
Right.
You had pictures, you had explanations.
Right.
And it was just another repeat and
refresher.
A refresher. And that program I did.
I think you were maybe 4 years ahead of me then. I started in 94, I believe.
In 94.
Right. So you were in her program.
I started in 84.
Right.
In 90.
Right.
Yeah.
I started. My first Pilates lesson was in 92.
Okay.
With a dancer and by a dancer. So we all got it right away. Now, here we come to the part that is so remarkable, so astounding. And when I heard about this from our lovely Jennifer Stacy, who's no longer with us in body, but she is with us in spirit. I do believe she brought us together.
Absolutely. Well, first let's give a mention to Jennifer.
Yes,
Okay,
please,
Jennifer
please.
was, and it saddens me to say was, a remarkable teacher, student, trained with Ramana and Kathy and Eve Gentry and many people, kept
Ron
immaculate
Fletcher.
notes. Ron Fletcher, and I don't think Jennifer ever fully got her fame as well deserved.
Very humble and very kind.
Yes, and excellent teacher. I'm very fortunate to have her as one of my peers and friends
Yes.
for all this time. So yes, her spirit is with us right now.
And she is the one that told me about you and that you were in Joe's original space. I said, "What? That's unbelievable. She has to be on my podcast. I have to talk to her." And Jennifer said, "Oh, you'd really like her. She needs to come onto your radio show," when I still had my radio show. You, in 2005, how did that actually happen? So it's 2005. What is happening that you happen to know that there's a sign in the building, an apartment for rent? How did that work out?
Well, first let me just go a little
Back?
back on some history. Okay, so in 1984, I started, with Carola, and from then, as I mentioned, I studied with, went to Ramana, went to Kathy, went to Naja, and when Carola was getting ready to retire, I wanted to open up my own studio, and
You felt ready.
I've ready enough,
And whose apparatus? Whose apparatus?
I didn't, well, that even wasn't the issue yet. I mean, whether I would get Carola's apparatus, who knew, or who she was going to give it to, that wasn't an issue. I mean, Gratz was around, so getting equipment, I would have gotten it probably through Gratz. And Adelio Ferraro, who was a teacher with me also at Carola's, he was a former ballet dancer as well. And he taught at Carola's for many years. When Carola had retired, he opened up a small studio in his apartment. First, what happened was I wanted to open up my own studio, and I couldn't get any backing from family or non-family because they didn't know what Pilates was. They was like, "Pilates, what's that? That's a fad."
Exactly. What's that?
We don't know what that is. Okay. So I went to Columbia University Teachers College to get a degree in exercise physiology, minoring in dance education, so that I would have the credentials to say, okay, now I have the credentials. Can you now back me in a studio?
Oh, smart girl.
And I was going to open up my studio with Kimberly Dye, who many of you might or might not know her, but she invented the Stretch Ease Band, which is a wonderful aid to get people to understand how to work their body. And I use it constantly with my clients, which helps them really get into the Pilates spinal work and et cetera, et cetera. And then I said, so I got this master's degree, and which is also where I met Irene Dowd and Marika Molnar. Both these two incredible,
brilliant
anatomists, therapists, teachers. And I started studying, of course, with both of them, wherever I could. So I got this master's degree. And then while I was doing my paper, was my final paper for my master's degree was where I met, Marika Molnar, because I did my paper comparing a Pilates exercise regime as opposed to what was being offered in the physical therapy setting. And it was because of Marika that I became a reflexologist in 89. I didn't know what reflexology was either, but Marika said, "Do you know of any reflexologists?" And I said, "No, Marika, what is that?" And when she explained to me what it was, I said, "Great, and this is something I can do on dancers." Great. The next thing I was enrolled in a reflexology school. And then, of course, then the AIDS crisis hit New York, and Adelio, who also is no longer with us, succumbed to the AIDS crisis and passed away. And before he did, he gave me all of his equipment, which I then put into my living room in my apartment.
Wow.
So for 15 years or so, I taught Pilates out of my apartment. And then when Marika had asked me to kind of work, with the dancers in the therapy room, I couldn't because I didn't have a license. So I went to massage school in 1996 so I can get a massage license so that I can practice the reflexology. And of course, then massage too. The reflexology has always been my specialty. Another little side note is because remember, we're talking about posture, how you stand on your feet.
Yes.
Is going to determine the rest of the body. And that's a lot that I got from Carola. When you do your posture analysis, a lot about where your feet are will determine the legs in your muscles, up your hip, up your spine, etc. So I got my massage license, and then Marika was able to hire me at New York City Ballet. And I worked for them for 6 years. And that's how I really got to work with incredible dancers, of course, in my apartment. Life was perfect. And very simple, so I was very happy, during those years. But then it came to a point where one day I went to get my hair done, and my hairdresser is on 53rd Street and 9th Avenue. So I always walk down, get off the subway at Columbus Circle, and walk down 8th Avenue. And every time I pass 939 8th Avenue, I'd always reflect on my dance days. By now,
Clark Center.
Right, Clark Center. By now, I had known that before it was Clark Center, it was Joe Pilates Contrology gym. And one day, in 2004, I was just walking down the street and I saw a sign in the window that said space for rent. Not knowing exactly what it was, but my body started to shake. And after talking with my hairdresser, I decided, let me just call this number and see what it was. And as soon as I walked into the space, which actually was my ballet classroom and also Joe Pilates space, or on that floor, and we can go into that.
It was the back of his studio?
Yeah, there's some, when Ramona came to visit the studio when I opened, she said, oh, this part was his living room. And when Kathy Grant said, this part was where he took private people back to work on their particular issues. And remember, there were 2 fires in that space during Joe's tenure there. So things had moved around. Most of the pictures that we see of Joe, his studio is in the front facing 8th Avenue. But things had constantly moved. So whether he was in my space in the early the late 20s and 30s and 40s before he moved to the front of the building, however it is, his spirit walks that floor. and there was only one bathroom on that floor.
Oh my.
So if you live there and you work there, it was a very unique building that housed artists. It was called the Van Dyke Studios.
Oh.
And it was one of the few buildings in New York that gave the tenant both a commercial and residential lease, because the artist couldn't afford to spend a place to live plus go rent another place to do their artwork or to do their dance work. So it was a very unique building filled with all kinds of artists, musicians, dancers, singers, all through the years. So it's definitely a a building that just houses all kinds of wonderful spiritual history
Okay, so this is in 2005 when this happened.
that I opened. Well, it was in 2004, and then it took time to renovate. So I officially opened on Super Bowl Sunday in February 2005.
That's unforgettable.
That's unforgettable because a lot of friends couldn't come to the opening party because of the football game.
They're watching the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl.
Well, so how fortuitous, though. You're going to get your hair done, right? And then you look at 939 8th Avenue, and then you see a sign that says for rent, and you get the chills. You know that's coming from spirit.
Yes. Well, it's just like everything that's happened in my life. Things present themselves on a plate, whether you, the recipient, whether you take from it and go for it is fine. I didn't know what I was going to be doing in my future, just being a dancer and a waitress. So all these things that came to me, I felt were coming to me for a reason. And if I didn't know much about it, I just pursued it.
And you were
every
open.
one of those, I was open. And every one of those paths, all my education, all my continuing education, it was there. So I just went for it and very happy.
Do you have, or do you feel a sense of responsibility for continuing his legacy, especially because you're right there?
Well, absolutely. As I say, if you remember in those hot dog Hebrew National commercials, we answer to a higher authority. I mean, I have I have a responsibility to the people who believed in me, who gave me my family, who put me into business. I had to answer to them to prove my worth. But basically I was like, why me? Why did I get this space? This space of Joe's had been available for more than 5 years. So
I wonder what it was before.
It was.
It wasn't Clark Center.
No,
that was
when Clark Center had moved into the 40s.
Right.
And I think it became a ballroom dance place because when I got into the space, there were all these
heel marks.
Well, foot drawn, like where you step for ballroom dancing. They already they had it like painted on the floor, certain dance moves and stuff. And then it became just a rental studio because there's a place called Ripley Greer Studios, which is very well known in the acting and dance world. People just rent space, all kinds of people, whether it be dance, spiritual, music, a lot of plays, rehearsal. So it was just rented for whoever. A lot of TV productions were rented there, but it was empty. There was no lease on it for 5 years. Actually, Gymboree had actually gotten that space before I did.
Who is this?
Gymboree, it's a gym for kids. Okay. And they had actually got the lease on that place. But when I went to see it, they were having issues with Gymboree. And because it's such an old building and the elevator breaks down quite a bit, the Gymboree people decided not to go there.
It's so New York.
Because people are coming in with their baby carriages and they couldn't afford not to have the elevator not working. So it was a win-win because Gymboree was able to kind of get out of the lease that they signed because I was ready to take over that space. So it was a win-win for everybody.
It's unbelievable.
And the elevator still breaks down. So
I remember those days. Oh my goodness.
But another little funny story I just want to bring up about the elevator and Kathy Grant. When I had my opening party, Kathy Grant came and my mother was the greeter at the door. And when Kathy Grant came up through the stairs, my mom had recognized her. I had shown her pictures and my mom said to her, "You must be Kathy Grant." And she said, "Yes, you must be Roberta's mother." And she said, "Yes." And my mother very politely said, Kathy, there's an elevator in the building. And Kathy said, I know, but I wanted to walk up the stairs like I did 50 years ago. So
Mm.
I would have that spirit in me when I came into the studio.
Oh,
It was
that's
delightful.
lovely.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Now, what about teachers and students coming to your studio now that know of the history? What is that like for you,
Well,
especially coming from other countries or different parts of America when they step foot into your
yes.
space?
Yeah, let me just bring that back just a second to say that all I ever wanted once I had discovered Pilates was to have a studio like Carola or Naja and Kathy on a little bit bigger scale, not as big as Romana, but something. That's all I ever wanted, was just to be one thing. And I'm not very good at social media. I'm not very techie knowledge and things like that. And what brought me to so-called a little bit of fame was that I was in Joseph Pilates' space. So people would come from all over the world just because of the space, not because of me. And I'm a gracious host as well. So all kinds of reactions. People stand at the door and they actually cry. Oh my God, oh my God, I can't believe this is where it happened. I mean, I wish I had a candid camera for everybody's reactions when they first come in. And then of course I try to encourage them to take a class. Not so much that, the studio needs to make money to pay this huge rent
Yes,
that
sure.
bound to, but just that if you're in the space of Joe, you owe it to Joe to take a
Yes,
class in his studio. So
yes.
I have been so fortunate because I'm not a traveler. And especially these days, I don't plan on getting on a plane until at least 2023. So I am very fortunate that New York is just such an epicenter for the world that people have come to me. And I am so grateful for every person from all over the world and all over the country who have come for that reason.
Yes. Do
It's
people
been
ever
wonderful.
bring you gifts?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Oh, for example.
Especially Japanese people. Japanese, maybe it's something culturalized, but as thankful for being there, yes, I get scarves or food, candies. I've gotten Ukrainian chocolate covered prunes, which was very interesting. you know, little things like that. But mostly everybody comes, for the love of Pilates, and also most of these teachers that have come are also looking to continue their education.
Can you tell they've been taught well, that they understand the method?
Um, we're all at different levels, and it's sometimes hard to judge. My peers, my generation, as I mentioned that, earlier, Jennifer and Jillian and Deborah, my probably closest relationships, we studied a long time. Even if we were teaching, we were still studying. So the difference is that, people are learning faster. You can become a Pilates teacher in a year. We didn't have programs in my day, so it was a longer process before you became a teacher. So yes, many of them know the outside of the Pilates. They know the names of the exercises. And of course,
Right.
now, depending on what style of school you're trained from, there are different ways that they approach the work. So that has also been an education for me as well. I'm always understanding, but I will always teach basically what
Yes.
I've learned, because it's
Yes.
worked for me. And now that I am a senior citizen, it is still working for me. And all the education work that I've done with Irene Dowd and Marika Moner to help me understand why the work works as your body changes as you age. And so it's still working for me, knock on wood.
Good. Good.
Things I don't have any physical issues, I mean, just of course getting old, those
Maturing.
issues.
You're maturing.
Maturing, which I do want to add that this is one of the professions where your age is in your favor.
Mm-hmm.
And as I have found, Pilates teachers from around the world are also seeking for more education. Even though they have been to a particular school, they know that's not the end all. And those who are seeking the Pilates on their own personal journey, besides their teaching journey, those are two separate paths that actually walk side by side with each other.
Yes, I agree.
So it's a very humbling experience for me to teach everybody. Each body that comes to me is
We're
a new
detectives. We are like detectives.
Yes, detectives, and I like to say they're all like a jigsaw puzzle.
Yes.
And trying to put all those pieces together to get them to do the work as Joe set forth, and the way that I was taught as well, to me has proven its test of time. As one of Joe's sayings was, "You will grow old gracefully."
Oh, beautiful.
And I am very thankful and humbled for that, because it's working for me.
Yes. Yes. Roberta, we are running out of time, and I'm going to ask you to come back because there are so many other questions that we aren't going to get to. Really important questions that, for example, we have to discuss when you just touched upon in terms of some of the modern approaches to Joe's work, and then the work that we were taught by the elders, and why there's such a gap between these two approaches and philosophies. We're going to save that for another episode. You're absolutely coming back, whether you like it or not. But in closing, in speaking of teachers, because we all need to stay students the more we teach, do you have any advice for teachers so they don't get burnt out, that they continue to have a sense of curiosity, that they want to keep exploring the work with their students and for themselves? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, well, first I think, when we come back in the new year, you need to explain to me what burnout is. I mean, burnout is because you're really tired. Are you burnt out just from physically teaching, or are you burnt out because you're not getting enjoyment out of what you've been teaching anymore? So we really need to define burnout. The only thing I would say is that, life is always a relationship with yourself. I learned this from Kimberly Dye. The only person you're in competition with is yourself. And if you take care of yourself, you can also take care of others. But I do recommend studying now because of COVID, which has one of the silver linings is that it has brought the virtual Pilates world to life. And there are so many wonderful teachers out there offering their take. It's like the telephone game. You start here and kind of where does it go? And I would say study with everybody, anybody you can. Just keep the work for yourself. Put it on your own body. Ingest it in your body. Try things on your clients. And I think that will always, that's an important thing is to continue just studying with other people. It's like a news report. There's the news, and then there's 5 different commentators on their opinions of the news. So you listen to them all and you find what your truth is and what's comfortable for you. But just continue, especially with this virtual world. There are so many wonderful people that I will talk about who I personally will recommend that you get with them virtually as much as you can. And when travel restrictions allow, go have some, live sessions for yourself as well. But just to remember that one of the things that gets to me is that I find that some Pilates teachers are tired of teaching the same routine. Oh, I'm tired of knee stretches and I've done this. They want to teach all kinds of fancy, new, different stuff. But there is a great power in repetition. As a dancer, you learn to plie from the age of 4, and you're still wanting to correct that simple plie at the age of 94. And you have a reference to grow within repetition. So I would like to say, don't get bored with repetition. Okay, stick some other things in here and there, as long as you stay in the Pilates mentality in terms of coordinating your movement with breath and good alignment. But just keep doing it, because it's simply difficult or difficultly simple, or it's not really as hard as you think, but practice makes perfect, and you'll never be perfect. I'll never be perfect. I'll still want to still improve that knee stretch or that long stretch, or just the fact that I'm still doing long spine. I'm not inhibited still. The work has worked for me, and I just would like to be that kind of teacher to help it work for you as well.
That was beautiful. Anyone listening that just wants you, Roberta, they want you right now. How do they get in touch with you? What's the best way? Yes, telepathically.
is the best way. But the best is just email the studio at info@rolates.com, and we'll get back to you.
And spell it so for people.
Info and Rolates, ROLATES.com. Rolates to rhyme with Pilates. Kathy always had a good chuckle of that name, and it was basically named that because when I was working with New York City ballet dancers, their nickname for me was Ro. And they're the ones who coined, have you done your Rolates today? And giving me, whatever. So it just became a kind of funny thing. And we just decided to call it Rolates Pilates, although most new people say Rolates Pilates, but it's really Rolates Pilates.
But you're following in Joe's footsteps there as well, because it was the dancers who said to each other, let's go to Pilates. He was teaching Contrology, right?
Yes, and the dancers embraced it because of Balanchine.
Right.
And I do think dancers do make wonderful Pilates teachers, because we have the art of grace, and it's about how you move through life, and dancers have
yes.
How can you explain it?
Beauty
of movement,
inner beauty.
Yes.
Roberta Kirschenbaum, I can't wait to see you in the new year. I can't wait to actually see you in your studio sometime in our lives. Thank you so much for your time, Roberta.
Thank you, Darian. And thanks for all who are listening, and keep up the work.
Excellent advice. As you are aware, I've been featuring one of my dedicated students for each episode. And for today's show, her name is Rachel Taylor. Rachel is the owner of Rachel Taylor Pilates in England. When asked how the Pilates method has helped her, she says, Pilates has impacted my life not only physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. The minute I tried Pilates, I instantly fell in love with it. Its methodical approach just made sense. I loved how the movements helped my once tight, short body feel lengthened and in a way I had never encountered before. It was as if I had done the biggest yawn and had woken up. By the way, Rachel's studio is slated as the international location for my next workshop, whenever it's safe to do so. Class size will be limited, so please reach out if interested. All Things Pilates is created, edited, produced, and hosted by me, Darian Gold. Mastered audio mix by Fabian Romero. A reminder for those interested in learning more about the Pilates system and how the mat and the apparatus relate to each other, I offer monthly apparatus classes for you to continue your Pilates education. For more information, please visit dariangold.com. Life is about staying open. Remain curious, and your life will never be boring. Stay tuned for our Season 3 highlight show in a couple of weeks. And as always, thank you so much for supporting and sharing with others all things Pilates.